All right, apparently we are live.
Welcome to the In the Garden podcast. This is Gideon Marlatt with your other host, Jake Hughes.
Hi.
Our special guest today is Colton Bennett. Colton, how you doing?
I'm very glad to be here. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Absolutely. Now, Colton, we have you on the show today because May 16th coming up is a very important day in terms of our local politics.
Yes, it is.
It says, I have with me a card with your picture on it and your name on it. It says, elect Colton Bennett, Latah County Library Trustee. So you're running for, let's just start out here. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us what you're running for and what the job entails and why are you running?
100%, yeah. So it's an honor to be here. It's an honor to be able to talk about these really important issues.
Happy to have you.
Yeah. So I'm running for Latah County Library Trustee. Latah County has 7 libraries, and they're managed through a board of 5 trustees that the people get to elect.
Okay.
They serve for 6-year terms, and they manage about $1.7 million in property tax money that's collected from the residents of the county. And
Wow.
so May 16th will be the election for 2 of those seats. A full 6-year term, and then the second seat is a 4-year term that's filling a vacancy that came up on the board. And so I'm running for the 6-year term. I have 2 opponents, and these are what are called nonpartisan races. So what that means is that the candidates appear on the ballot in an off year, 2023, and they don't have party labels next to them. It's just your name.
Okay.
And typically that's been the understanding of how these elections have been conducted, as they've been nonpartisan throughout most of
Typically.
political.
I hear a butt coming on.
Yes. No, yeah, we'll leave it at that.
Okay, interesting. So how did you get involved in politics? You have a bit of a background in the military, right? How did you get involved with local politics?
Yeah, so when I was growing up, I grew up for about 4.5 years of my life in Utah. I served as a legislative intern for a conservative organization called Utah Eagle Forum.
Okay.
And for several years, I got to go up and observe the legislative sessions in Salt Lake City. I got to see how things were run, how you write a bill, how you put together legislation, and the importance of passing good laws and the consequences of not doing that. And when I was 16, I actually had the privilege to serve as a county director for Ted Cruz's presidential campaign.
Oh, wow.
Nice.
In Summit County, Utah. And
Mic drop. I mean,
I know, right? It was a great
I got
opportunity.
to
I actually got featured on the front page of the Deseret News with Senator Cruz himself.
Wow.
Yeah, so
What an honor.
it was just me shaking his hand. Most of the attention was on him.
Okay.
Sure.
Backdrop.
But-
Just-
But
Yeah.
still.
Yes.
yeah, that's pretty good.
So it was a great opportunity to see how politics was carried out on not only legislatively, but on the local level.
Yeah.
The saying all politics is local is really true.
Okay.
When I was 20, I decided I wanted to try something different with my life. I wanted to get a little bit of life experience under my belt. Instead of just being the teenager that likes politics, I wanted to do something to live life, if you will.
Yeah.
Sure.
So I followed in the footsteps of my dad, and I enlisted in the United States Army.
Hoorah.
Yeah, yeah. I served as my job title was combat medic. So I was a medic for the Army, and I served on active duty for 3 years. I did just under a 1-year deployment in Eastern Europe.
Very nice.
We were there when the Russians invaded Ukraine, and we spent most of that time in Poland. So then I came back to the United States last June, actually.
Okay.
And then...
Oh, that's that. Okay. Yeah. So you were there like kind of in the heat of it.
Yeah.
Or at least
so
the beginning parts of it.
I have not even been back in the U.S. for a year yet. So
Wow.
the end of next month will be 1 year back in the U.S. And it's great to be home.
Yeah.
So then when I moved back, I started coming to local political meetings, getting involved with folks here. My wife is a student at New St. Andrews College. Sydney, she was actually on this show.
We had her on the show last week.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was
great
She
to
was
have her,
great.
yeah.
Such a great conversation. If you haven't listened to that conversation, we highly recommend that you go listen.
Yeah. I mean, so far you're stacking up quite nicely. So
I know the points. I know. My wife
Equally
has all the
yoked.
points there. Yes. No, my wife is absolutely my inspiration. And so
Yeah.
I decided when I got off of active duty, I'm in the reserves now. I decided, well, I better follow my wife. So I came here to Moscow.
Yeah.
It's generally a wise thing to do.
I guess it's
Wise
important.
decision.
So I found out that we were holding this election in May, and I called down to the clerk and I said, "Who's running?" And they said, we probably won't even hold an election. I said, "What do you mean?"
Whoa.
He said, "These races are typically uncontested. We
Mm.
usually just have one person file for it, nobody runs against them, and that's it." And I said, "Well, these are libraries and property tax on the line. I think we ought to have an election."
Yeah.
So for the first time in a decade, we're having an election because I filed the paperwork to run.
Really? And there's an election every year?
Every 2 years.
Every 2 years? I mean,
Yeah.
that's still an impressive amount of elections just kind of, skipped over? Just
Yeah.
I guess we're not going to. Yeah, the
There's no need
systems
for
that we
competition
have-
at this point. Yeah.
Wow.
Turnout is typically between 7 and 12% in these elections. This year, it's going to be off the charts, but
Yeah.
typically it's not many folks show up.
Yeah.
Wow.
Interesting.
Wow. Oh, hold on, real quick. So,
Yeah.
explain a little bit about the position and what it entails and what you're actually going to be overseeing. Yeah. So, just kind of where that
Library
actually-
trustee?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you serve on a board with 4 other folks for a total of 5 trustees.
Okay.
And together they provide kind of a legislative and executive oversight over the taxing district that is the library. We manage 7 branches here in Layton County.
Okay.
We get to set the rate of property tax up to a particular amount allowed by the legislature. That has to be approved by the county commissioners, but typically they always say yes to what the library board agrees upon, and they can't make up their own. It has to come from us. If they say no, then it has to go back to us, and we have to set the rate of property tax. So these taxing districts, cemetery, sewer, library, they get
Yeah.
to set a portion of the property tax.
Interesting.
And so we would be determining that rate, determining how that money is spent, managing that money. We'd also be setting policies for the library. So the kind of materials and where they're kept, what kind of materials we buy and manage, access to the rest of the county, all of these things and these policies would be set through the library district. They are set through the library district.
Wow. So you have pretty much direct power over how much taxes homeowners are paying.
To a degree.
To a degree, right,
Yeah. So
right.
on your property tax bill, you'll see a list. There's a property tax that paid to the school. There's property tax paid to the cemetery. Property tax paid to the library.
Mhm.
So I have, if I get the privilege to be elected, and your library board, whoever it is, has control over that slice
Right.
of the property tax, that's the library.
Okay.
If you
Wow.
haven't guessed already, pretty much the premise of this episode is this man deserves your vote.
I'd be honored.
most
to
of
give
our-
Absolutely.
Yeah, most of our listeners are in Layton County as of now. And if you have the means and if you can, please go out and vote on May 16th. Early voting is closed, right?
Yeah, today was the
Currently?
last day of early voting. If someone has already requested an absentee ballot, make sure to get that in by election day. Otherwise,
Yeah.
your option for voting is show up at the polls, your regular polling place on
Right.
election day.
Yeah, so if you take away anything from this episode, please go out and vote for Mr. Colton
Vote.
Bennett.
Where is the polls? School and post office?
So there's 34 districts. No, I'm sorry, 34 precincts here
Okay.
in Moscow. 2 of them are vote by mail precincts, so they got a ballot mailed to their house. The other 32 have their voting locations where they normally are. I have a list. So in my precinct here in Moscow, we vote over at the fairgrounds.
Okay.
Yep. So everybody, there's actually a list on my website. If you go to bennettforidaho.com, it has a list of where your precinct is. And if you are not a registered voter in Layton County, fear not, you can register at the polls.
There you go. From the mouth of the man himself.
Okay, interesting. So as I'm looking at your card right now, there's a list of bullet points that basically cover what you seek to accomplish if you have the privilege of being elected. And the top one is just in big bolded words, obscenity. And then that's
Context.
Okay.
I'm gonna add some context.
More obscenity.
No. I'll add the context. It says, I will work to enforce obscenity laws and keep sexualized material out of the hands of children. So
Okay,
are we
that's better.
talking
That's
like,
a lot better?
are we talking like drag queen story hour sort of stuff?
So, to the best of my knowledge, despite all the headlines that you see on the news, I'm not aware of any drag queen story hours being conducted at Latah County Library.
Sure.
Hallelujah.
Praise God for it.
Well, I just, you have to be careful with the things that we say we're going to put a stop to, because I'm not sure that's happening.
Yeah.
More of the concern that many folks have addressed is what kind of materials are appropriate for the kids section.
Right.
Sure.
And so, despite the accusations from our opponents and those who seek to undermine our campaign, this is not about banning books. We believe everyone ought to be able to tell their story. We believe in the First Amendment. We believe in free speech. This is about what kind of materials are appropriate in the kids section at taxpayer expense.
Okay. Yeah. See, that's a definite aspect. I was about to ask, how does this? Do you get that a lot? Like, hey, isn't this infringing upon First Amendment rights?
So yes, we get challenged a lot on our campaign. When I sent out these mailers, I've sent out about 7,000 mailers across the county. Thankfully, we've had a lot of generous donors that have donated to this campaign and this cause, and we've been able to get the message out. People who are on the left saw that and they said, this guy wants to ban books, which is an absolute lie.
Right.
Yeah.
And they took to Facebook and they said, just look at his haircut. He looks like a Nazi. I'm
It's
serious.
called military.
Whoa.
People. It's called military.
But there have been a few individuals that have reached out to me and they've said, what exactly would this look like? And we've had the conversation. So Kootenai and Shoshone County.
Don't worry, you're not part of it, so you don't have to learn it.
The two counties to the north of us, Shoshone and Kootenai County.
Okay.
They have implemented a system which I think is absolutely genius. So when you go in to watch a movie, for instance, the movies are rated G, PG, PG-13, R, and on up.
Right.
But we don't have that system for books. Any kid with a library card in Latah County can go in and check out any book they want. And there's no notification for the parents. So if you're a parent and your kid has a library card, there's no system for you to be able to see what your kid is checking out and not checking out.
Right.
And so Kootenai County came up with a system which I think is absolutely genius. And they said, we're going to rate our books. There's under 12, there's 12 to 18, and there's 18 plus.
Right.
And if you're under 12, you can't be checking out 18 plus books. Pretty simple rule. Now, if
that does sound pretty simple.
If a parent comes in and says, you know what, I want my child to have access to more mature content, then an exception is, of course, made. And the kid can check out whatever books his parent gives permission. But just a kid walking into the library with a card, the materials have to be age appropriate.
Right.
That system's already in place in Kootenai County. This isn't an idea that Colton came up with. In fact, the liberals running for library board in Kootenai County in this election year have said, this system works great. This is a great system. Let's go with it. But when I suggest that here in Latah County, I'm called a Nazi.
Yeah. It's weird how that works.
Yeah.
You're a little too white. Anything you say, it just doesn't work.
I think it's just a matter of folks not listening to common sense solutions.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned the First Amendment. First Amendment is meant to protect free speech. There's two things that are different about our library system. Number one, it's paid for by taxpayer dollars.
Right.
So whatever speech goes on in the library, you and I pay for. We pay for it. And so since we pay for that speech, we should get a say in how it's carried out. And then the second thing is laws protecting children are not a violation of the First Amendment. They aren't. And the reason I know this is because in 2003, the American Library Association went all the way to the Supreme Court and tried to say that there shouldn't be rules that said kids couldn't access obscene materials on computers. And the Supreme Court said, no, there absolutely can be rules that say they can't do that.
Yeah.
So the question is this: why do we have rules for movies? We have rules for the internet in the library. We don't have any rules for the books.
Interesting.
That's really strange.
I don't know. Maybe, yeah, it's just because books are felt like they're outdated, that people just haven't focused on them. But they're still a potent source of knowledge and
Absolutely.
and intel.
And this is the other thing when it comes to taxpayer money. The accusation that I want to ban books is simply not true. With only so many taxpayer dollars to go around, I want to spend taxpayer money on the best books.
Right.
If we're going to buy books, let's buy the best ones.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's not buy the trash. Let's not buy the controversial pieces. That's not about suppressing speech. It's just saying we only have so much money. Let's give kids the best books possible to read.
Yeah, I
Right.
feel like people somehow equate a library in its selection of books, or the lack thereof, I should say, with somehow, because it's it's representing government, that somehow because they're not allowing this book in there, it's or maybe just choosing other books instead of that one, that it's somehow some sort of mandate by the government. Hey, we're not going to allow that book. Well, it's like no. The First Amendment still works. It's just whether or not it's just we're going to represent ourselves with this book or not. Is that a fair assumption?
No, and it's the question of what kind of speech is the taxpayer going to be compelled to pay for?
Right.
But you brought up the kind of books that are in our library. I want to share a list of some, very briefly, some books that are not in our library, which I think you all will find quite interesting.
Yeah, please.
So I came up with this the other day, and this is a list of some books and materials that are not in our library. The man who turned the world upside down in Europe, Martin Luther. Not a single piece or work by Martin Luther is in our library. Not one. Not a single one. There is nothing by John Calvin. My wife and I were looking at this. There are no adult books in Braille. There's some kids' books in Braille, but there's no adult books in Braille, including the best-selling book in world history, the Bible. There's no Braille Bible in our library.
Interesting.
Oh, wow.
Well, is it out of curiosity, is there a normal, it's just a English Bible?
Yes. There's over 100,000 books in our library system. Our library system is very well stocked. I'm just pointing out some examples where we could do better.
Yeah.
There are no biographies or works of William Tyndale, which is interesting considering the guy was burned at the stake for publishing books, particularly the Bible.
I was just thinking that.
Talk about book banning.
Yeah.
But there's nothing on him. Dietrich Bonhoeffer's Cost of Discipleship is not in our library. The most, other than the Sermon on the Mount by Christ, the most well-read and published sermon in American history centers in the hands of an angry God.
Jonathan Edwards, right?
It is not in our library.
Wow.
And neither is Dr. Martin Luther King's letter from the Birmingham jail.
Really?
This really makes you think.
That last one I'm kind of surprised by. All the other first ones is like, okay, they're all Christian. It kind of assumes that there would be a sort of biased against them. But the last one, I feel like,
he's their hero.
It's like, that's the man.
Well, and it's an amazing letter. I'll totally make all my kids read it in high school.
Yeah.
It's a great letter. But we don't have that in our library. There's a commentary on it, but that letter itself is not in our library.
Interesting.
So back to the point about obscenity. All I'm saying is with so many great options available, I think we should spend our money on the best books.
Right.
Yeah. So I kind of want to turn the conversation this way because we've talked a little bit off the podcast. This was at the latest Civics Club meeting. You were talking a little bit about a Reddit thread that
yes,
that has been started, all centered around your campaign.
Yes,
and just you in general.
The famous.
I feel like we should use this platform to address some of the Reddit stuff. You were kind of touching on it earlier.
Do we want to delve into this? This feels like, it's Reddit we're talking about.
Granted, it is Reddit. So, where all the trolls are.
Yeah.
Probably the two primary sources of slander for my campaign have been the lies that are published in the letters to the editor. We've had 24 letters to the editor just bashing me, which is unprecedented for any election cycle.
Yeah.
I think Donald Trump may have got one or two. I got 24.
Shaking
Wow.
Ted Cruz's hand, getting 24 letters to the editor.
That means you're doing something right.
And then the other source of a lot of defamation, humorously so, has been Reddit. Particularly a Reddit thread that says, Colton Bennett, and I'm taming the language to make it a little bit more family friendly.
We appreciate it.
Thank you.
It says Colton Bennett is a fascist who tramples on the American flag
Wow.
and a
Okay.
disgrace to the service he pretends to represent.
All because you don't want mature content in the kids section?
Yeah. So one of the themes of my campaign has been I have focused on my experience in the military and the things I've learned about leadership from there and trying to put that forward.
Yeah.
And so that was a way for them to take a dig and a swipe at my campaign, is to basically say I'm un-American and a disgrace to military service.
That's sad.
Which is interesting considering their Reddit handles like Crazy Pug Lady and
Yeah, right.
Explosive Diarrhea. I'm pretty sure these are not exactly the kind of folks that
These are not the experts?
they're not the bulwarks of our community.
Yeah, right.
You're telling me the girl with the blue hair and the kind of butch cut has not served in our military?
Well, I mean, I really don't care what kind of haircut or hair color someone's rocking, but I think people should be respectful.
No, you're right.
And the problem with most of these attacks on my campaign, whether it's published in the Lewiston Tribune or Moscow Daily News or somebody who's angry on Reddit, is they've never talked to me. They've never asked me what I think. They've just told me what I think.
Strange.
No, I mean, the one thing that kind of you said earlier that kind of piqued my interest was that some people have actually reached out and asked you some of these questions, like, are you actually seeking to ban books or whatnot? And that, I mean, though there's little of it, and as far as the left reaching out and trying to talk or discuss, that's a little hope.
There
That's
is some
good.
examples of folks, mostly folks in the middle have reached out, but
That's good.
I have had a couple of left-leaning folks that have reached out and wanted to talk. I will say my opponent at the start of this race, his name is Mr. Wayne Schmidt. And at the start of this race, I sent him a text message and I called him and he did not answer and has not returned my calls. And so at the start of this race, I tried to start a dialogue with my opponent because I think that's healthy. I think that keeps the election from going down a tone of absolute selfishness and craziness.
Right.
And 24 letters to the editor. But he hasn't returned my calls. So although there are some examples of folks reaching out, I think predominantly it's a lot of people that won't have the conversation with the other side.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunate.
For sure.
Especially considering we're talking about literacy and speech.
Wow.
Yeah, your opponent probably was just assuming that he would be getting a free ride or a free pass into the chair of the office. That's he's probably butt sore right now.
Very possibly.
Which is
Okay.
unfortunate, but
Another thing I want to bring up, there's another heading on your card, personal responsibility. I oppose leftist experimentation that allows patrons to never pay late fees on the books they fail to return at taxpayer expense. Can you talk a little bit about this and what you're going to do as library trustee to address this problem?
100%. So in 2018, our library system did away with fines. This was part of their latest initiative for equity, inclusion, diversity, this kind of thing. And they said fines, to oversimplify their argument, they essentially said that fines made it impossible for certain demographics to access the services at the library. And fines accounted for about 1% of the library board's revenue in 2018. So about $15,000 today.
okay.
Now, the problem is that when people don't turn their books in, that there is a cost generated to the taxpayer because if Colton Bennett here doesn't turn in his books on chess, true story that this happened.
Okay.
Coming clean.
Then Gabe Wrench, who comes into the library, can't check out the books on chess.
Right.
Uh-huh.
And so there's an expense that's borne by the taxpayer in not being able to access the services of the library.
Right.
And so when there's no fine, that expense is moved from the person who was late with the books to the property taxpayer.
Mm.
The
Interesting.
$15,000 in fines that is not collected because property taxpayers and by consequence renters have to bear the cost.
Mm.
So when people under the new system that exists presently in Latah County, when people don't turn in their library books, their neighbors pay for it. I don't think that's fair.
Yeah.
I don't think
Amen.
that's right. I think when Colton Bennett doesn't turn in his library books, Colton Bennett should have to pay the fee.
Mm.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about rein-in people. I don't want to charge someone $10 because they were 20 seconds late on getting their library book in the slot.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm talking 10 cents a day or something like that. But
Yeah.
something that says when you're late with your library books,
Mhm.
this costs other people. Other kids can't read the books because you took them. That's
Right.
the message I want my kids to grow up understanding. And so it taught me an immense amount of responsibility when I was a kid and I didn't get my book on goldfish turned in time and I had to cough up 2 dimes. It's not about depriving people of access to the library. It's about making people take responsibility for their actions and not shoving it off on their neighbors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's consequences to actions.
Personal responsibility really matters. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that a lot.
No, I also like the idea of not, as a renter, not having to pay for someone else.
But you do actually.
I
So-
have no
sorry,
doubt right
Gideon.
now. Yeah.
The
Gosh.
property tax is passed off from the landlord to the renter.
Mhm.
And so the renter pays property tax indirectly in his or her rent.
Oh yeah.
Mm.
I mean so like I don't have an issue with that because that makes sense. Like there's
Yeah.
a reason why the landlord owns a business and we're paying to live there. We're gonna pay to just like any actual homeowner who's living in his house, like he's paying taxes on his own house. We're gonna pay taxes on the place we're living in. So it makes sense. But to be paying taxes for someone else to just steal a book, it's like wow. I mean, we just got the word at my own house that prices are going up, rent's going up because of taxes.
Yeah.
I mean, like $80 or something like that a person, or I don't know. It's crazy, but yeah, not fun.
No, not at all.
It's like, I thought I was making enough money,
Yeah.
and then I realized I'm gonna have to work like 3 extra hours.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well, Colton, I think I speak for all of us when I say that you thank you for coming on the show, first of all. And everybody who's listening needs to go out and vote for this man.
yes,
He will
May
serve,
16th?
He will
May
serve
16th.
this district
May 16th.
very, very well. Yeah, the Bennetts are just a huge blessing to this community overall. We had Sydney Bennett on last
Absolutely.
week, and we had a great conversation with her. And now we get to talk to her husband. And it's been great. Thank you, Colton, for coming on the show.
100%. And for anybody who's listening,
Yeah.
May 16th, take a photo ID and go to your local polling place and vote. And if you want to learn more about me and my campaign, go to bennettforidaho.com, bennettforidaho.com. My phone number's on the website. Give me a call anytime. There's two seats up for election on May 16th. There's a 6-year seat that I'm running for, and I'd encourage you to get out and vote for Colton Bennett for that. And then there's the 4-year seat for Latah County Library Board, and the candidate that has my full support for that is Juliana Bollinger. I think she's a great candidate and would represent our values well.
Yeah, go do that.
yeah, absolutely.
Great. Do you also
Awesome.
need proof of residency? Is that a
Yeah,
is that a
so
thing?
photo ID will work if your photo ID's like an out-of-state driver's license or something. Then you also need to take proof of address. So those 2 documents.
Perfect.
But yeah,
Okay, great.
That's awesome.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Colton, for coming on the show. We're going to wrap it up right here. This is In the Garden with Jake Hughes and Gideon Marlatt and our special guest, Mr. Colton Bennett himself.
Adios.
thank you for having me on.